Okay, we're live, and I am recording some. I'll be working on the OSRA project, and specifically on this story and pivotal tracker switch to factory girl. So the idea is that basically we want to start using factories in our tests, and I am implementing factories for the models that are currently defined in the project. And this is also closely related to the story improve model validation specs, which I'll try to avoid touching as much as possible. And hopefully we'll be successful. So what I have done so far is I have created basic factories for all the models that already had spec files, that already had specs predefined for them. This particular model here, sponsor type, its spec file was blank when I started. So I actually filled it out with actual specs. And the main reason for doing so was actually to validate that my factory is working as I intended, but also, of course, it's a very good idea to have the spec for the model, so here it is. The model itself is very simple. It basically has a name and code attributes, and validations are that they're both present and unique. So in my factory, I have sequences for both name and code. Code is simply a default sequence. The name sequence is a string name and followed by a sequential number. So in the spec, I am using the build step method on factory girl and defining it right at the top, making sure that it's valid right from the beginning, and then going through the validations. So for both name and code have to be present, and they both have to be unique. And what I have at the bottom here is just a little snippet of code that I will now use to validate the other factories that I've created. Because for the other factories, for example, if we start, so admin user I haven't touched yet because the spec is completely empty. But the partner spec, there is actually a substantial spec file here. And at this point, I don't want to refactor the spec at all to use the factory. All I want to do is make sure that my factory is producing a valid partner model. I don't know if this is the most efficient way of handling this, because ultimately this code snippet is I'm going to use it to test the factory, and then I'm going to throw it away, and I will do so for each factory. But I think my approach at the moment is that if the factory that I've set up produces a valid object, a valid model, then I can start confidently refactoring the specs to use that factory. So once again, I'm going to move this here so that that's all the sponsor type, and here's the partner spec. And I'll open the partner model as well to have that as a reference. So partner is more complicated than the sponsor type. It validates the presence and uniqueness of name. So again, I have name, which is a sequence, and it also validates the presence of province, and province is its own model. So in the factory, this is what I'm calling, and there is already a province factory. So this test of the factory validity is going to be a bit coupled here. But hopefully, since it's fairly straightforward, I won't have too many issues. Okay, so I'm going to take this code snippet and I'm going to paste it into spec. So I suppose I should just get rid of this specific thing here, and let's say test objects, and here we're building partner. I expect test object to be valid. And this seems to pass. So I hope that means that my factory is valid. It's creating a valid object. I'll just grab this snippet of code again. Close partner and move on to, we have province. Now province, I'll come back here in a second. Province is in province spec. So province validates presence and uniqueness of name and presence and uniqueness of code, and on top of that, code needs to be one of these numbers. Now the way I handled this in the factory is there's the same sequence for the name as always, but then the sequence for the code basically pulls out a sequential number from this array. And this method works. My concern is that it is not entirely foolproof. So in the extremely unlikely circumstance that that the test needs to instantiate multiple provinces using the factory, it might actually run through the entire array and then start calling non-existent indices on it. Now I see that as basically, well, pretty much an impossibility, I would say, in any kind of test suite that I can imagine. But nevertheless, I would like to come up with a better way to handle this. I mean, at some point, since we were validating both uniqueness of these codes and their presence in this array, sooner or later in the test suite, you will run out of numbers. And I don't know how to make the factory then fail gracefully and still not break the test. Again, like I said, I think that's a very unlikely scenario, but maybe somebody will come up with a suggestion here. So anyway, let's go to the spec, and here, this is province. I can run that. Right, I am running the right spec. And yeah, just to confirm in this particular case that my code generation, sequential code generation is working well. In this case, I'll create another subject 2. And validate, make sure that it is valid, and also I want to see that the array is being iterated correctly by the sequence. So I rerun this. Okay, and everything is passing, so both my objects are valid, and here are the codes 11 and 12. And if I look here, 11 and 12 are the 0th and the 1st elements of the array. So everything appears to be working as intended. Okay, so we're done with provinces. Next up is sponsor. We need more validations here. This is sponsors and sponsor spec. I need to go back here and grab this. I took the wrong one, but it's okay. The sponsor has additional constraints here. So nothing is unique anywhere, so I am not using sequences anywhere. It merely validates the presence of name, country, and sponsor type. Sponsor type, of course, is another model. So here I'm calling sponsor type factory. And then gender needs to be either male or female. So I'm quoting male. I don't see any issue with that. So let's run this. And again, for the factory, make sure I'm running the right spec, sponsor spec. Yep. The factory appears to be valid. Sponsor, I've already done sponsor type. So now let's go to status. And again, a very simple model, a very simple factory, exactly the same as sponsor type, in fact, I think. Yeah. And status spec is here. So again, I have this chunk of code. And again, of course, I don't have the right one, but that's okay. This is status. Okay, so the factories appear to be valid. Oh yeah, and finally, user spec is empty. I think the user model is being implemented by somebody else as we speak, so I won't touch it for now. I think the user model is, yeah, for now, not really fleshed out. Okay, so it seems that everything with my factories is fine. I'm going to, I wonder, I guess there's no reason for me to keep this code in here. So in fact, okay, if I'm not mistaken, then it's recording right. I haven't actually done anything, so there's nothing to commit, nothing to change. So at this point, the next step would be to actually start refactoring the specs and to include the factories. But that would, so that now begins to overlap significantly with this other story, which is improved model validation specs, and this is based on our earlier discussion on GitHub. Again, it was my proposal, so I suppose it's natural that I'm the one who gets to do this. So yeah, the idea is, and this is where factories are going to fit naturally. The idea is that currently, the way the specs are laid out, a sponsor is being created with a valid attribute, but also an attribute that's missing. So in this case, a name, in this case, a country or a type, and each test make sure that it's invalid. The proposal instead is to create a valid sponsor, or well, sponsor in this case, but a valid object, and then individually substitute, or basically individually invalidate various attributes, various aspects of it, and make sure that it does become invalid when we do so. So, since factories generate valid objects. Hello. How are you?
Not too bad. Yourself?
Good, good. Are you working on your story?
I'm just about to post to GitHub, but I was on a scrum earlier, and a lady called Viv was on there, and she said she'd like to watch. So I've posted her a message. I'm going to wait a few minutes to see if I get a reply before I push those changes. And then once I've pushed those changes, I'll send you the GitHub link so we can start Git Pong.
Okay, excellent. Did you just come in here, Craig?
Yeah, just this second.
Yeah. Basically, what I've only been recording for, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes. Basically, where I am at with the factory setups is that I now have factories for all the key models that we're using. The partners, provinces, sponsors, sponsor types, and statuses. And I've just gone through validation, so all the factories actually appear to produce valid objects, valid models, which is basically, which was my goal.
Yep.
So I'm not really sure how to proceed from here because since the factory produces a valid object, if I start using the factory in specs, that would immediately take me to the next story on Pivotal, the refactoring of model specs story, because then I would create a valid object with the factory right at the top, and then start invalidating it and make sure that it's invalid. So I'm actually wondering if
that sounds like a pull request, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm wondering if I can call this story finished. The factories are in place, they're valid. So you can start using them in the features, and then I can start working maybe on the refactoring story and start using them myself.
That sounds great. I mean, I think pull requests, the shorter and more specific,
Mm-hmm.
the sweeter. So, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So I think I'm at a point where I'm ready to do that.
Magic.
And it was. I mean, none of the models are especially complicated. The factories didn't need to have anything. This is my only.
Yeah. I don't know whether you've seen the conversations going on the channel. Basically, I think these come from an Excel spreadsheet, and they're already set up. So I've suggested, and they're put into production through DB Seed. Now, I think we should make the model read-only in active record to signal that this doesn't really change. I mean, he's using active admin, and that automatically sets up to allow you to create objects and destroy them, and that's what he's put that valid codes array in for, so that you can't create one that doesn't have one of those IDs. But I think if they're seeding the database and that information's already on there, making the active record model read-only is probably a more, I don't know, it's clear intent and maybe it's a little more eloquent, I don't know.
Right, yeah. I tend to agree. So I guess that would be another story, another refactoring then.
Yes.
Yeah. So for me, as far as factories go, for the time being, the only thing that I'm kind of uneasy about is that in factories you can have this sequence that basically its intent is to create unique attributes every time you call this particular factory. So in this case, in the extremely unlikely event that you actually end up calling the factory this many times, it's going to run off the array.
Oh, okay.
Now, I can't imagine how that would happen in a test suite. I mean, you're probably instantiating one or two object tops, basically. So, I don't believe that you would ever go through the whole array.
It's unlikely, isn't it? I think if we get to that stage, we've got another story, haven't we?
I suppose. Okay, so I'm not going to worry about it for now then, and let it go as is.
Magic.
Yeah. Okay.
Alrighty. So I'll probably see you around on the channels, and once I've pushed this to get my stuff to GitHub, I'll send you the link.
Yeah, please do.
Magic. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, you too. Have a good evening.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, that was good. So basically, yeah, I think if I switch back to Pivotal. So yeah, I think at this point, Factory Girl is implemented. We have working factories for all the relevant models. So I'm going to submit a pull request, call this story finished, or this chore rather, and then start working on improving the specs to use factories. And that's it for this pairing session. And we're done.